The bell above the dojo door chimed with a hollow ring as Marcus and Michael Thompson stepped inside, the smell of sweat and vinyl mats mixing with pine-scented cleaner. The Warriors Path Karate Dojo wasn't exactly welcoming. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, casting a sterile glare over the polished wood floors and mirrored walls. The twins stood silently, their gym bags slung over their shoulders, identical in every way, height, build, the tight braids in their hair, and yet invisible in a sea of white faces. The room paused for half a second as their presence registered. Conversations dipped. Eyes glanced, then shifted away with awkward speed. They were the only black kids here. Correction, 2 of only 3 in the whole class. "Welcome, boys," said a voice from across the room. Sensei Robert Mitchell, tall and leathery skinned with graying temples and a deep scar running from ear to jaw, strode over in his black GI, the belt around his waist faded to gray from decades of use. "You must be the Thompsons. I hear you've got spirit." Marcus nodded. Michael mumbled, "Yes, sir. Let's see what you're made of." The words were casual, but they hung heavy. The twins followed him into the main training area where 20 or so students, mostly teens, were warming up. The walls were covered with calligraphy and framed photos, championship wins, old newspaper clippings, faded smiles of past students. No one smiled now. Most of the students had already earned their colored belts. The Thompsons wore stark white. Today was the first day of a 3-month white belt probation. Then, if they passed, they'd get their yellow. As they dropped their bags and lined up with the others, the murmurs started. Subtle, coded, laced with something ugly. Words that sounded like jokes but felt like glass under bare feet. "Didn't know the NBA had a dojo division," one kid said with a smirk. "They probably think this is a basketball camp," another whispered. Marcus felt it before he heard it. The tightening in Michael's jaw. The stiffening of his shoulders. Their twin bond was more than intuition, it was like feeling your own skin react to someone else's bruise. "Eyes front." Mitchell barked. "Time to earn your place." The class snapped into place. Horse stance. Knees bent. Back straight. Hold. 1 minute. The burn hit almost immediately. Thighs trembling, back straining. Marcus clenched his fists and focused on the mirror, watching his brother beside him. They moved in perfect unison. If one twitched, the other mirrored. It wasn't choreography. It was instinct. Something older than practice. "Look at the twins," came a voice from the corner. Jake Harrison. 17, tall, lean, swaggering like a lion that thought it owned the dojo. Black belt. Legacy student. His father had donated thousands to the school. He stood beside Connor Mills, another black belt in Jake's personal echo chamber. "Monkeys learning to walk upright," Jake muttered, loud enough to carry. Connor chuckled. "Think they'll get bananas if they nail the stances." A few snickers rippled. Most students kept their eyes down. No one said a word. Marcus's stance faltered. Michael's wavered a second later. Their shame synchronized like always. Mitchell said nothing. He was 10 feet away. "Keep those backs straight, yellow belts," he called out, deliberately using the wrong rank. "Power comes from foundation." Michael's hands curled into fists at his sides. His face didn't move, but Marcus felt the fury boiling under his skin. It was a slow, silent rage. The kind that builds until it explodes. When one of them hurt, both bled. When one was shamed, the other wore it like a scar. After class, Mitchell called for sparring drills. Pairings were assigned without surprise. Jake was across from Marcus. Connor squared off with Michael. The air thickened. This wasn't training. It was a performance. "Light contact only," Mitchell said. "This is about technique, not power." Jake's eyes glittered with mischief. Connor cracked his knuckles. Ready? Mitchell asked. Marcus nodded, jaw tight. Jake didn't wait for a signal. His first kick came fast and low, technically pulled, but with enough impact to knock the breath out of Marcus's lungs. The mat came up hard. He gasped, blinking through tears. Oops, Jake said, fake concerned. Didn't mean to go that hard. From the other side of the mat, Michael grunted as Connor's fist caught his ribs. It wasn't sparring. It was punishment. They limped to the locker room afterward, silent. Neither spoke on the ride home. Their father, David Thompson, noticed the bruises but said nothing. He believed in grit. In not quitting. In letting kids toughen up. You boys are getting good training, he said. That Mitchell guy runs a tight ship. Marcus almost laughed. They went to bed that night in silence. But sleep didn't come. Not for a long time. They lay staring at the ceiling in their shared room, the darkness broken by slivers of streetlight through the blinds. You okay? Marcus finally asked. Michael didn't answer. Then, softly, they don't want us there. Marcus turned his head. Doesn't matter. We're staying. Michael swallowed hard. They're going to break us. Marcus clenched his fists under the blanket. Then we break back. In that moment, without saying it aloud, they made a vow. Not to quit. Not to run. And never again to walk into that dojo without fire in their chests. Some fights aren't chosen. Some wars begin in silence. But this was only the first bow. And something had just shifted. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The bruises came in shades of denial, purple along Marcus's ribs, yellow blooming on Michael's arm where Connor's grip had left its fingerprinted memory. In the locker room, they changed in silence, trying to hide the pain, both physical and emotional. Around them, the other boys talked about video games and tournaments, laughing like it was just another good day of training. But for Marcus and Michael, it wasn't training, it was survival. As they exited the dojo, the chill of the evening air sliced through their sweat-soaked uniforms. David Thompson was waiting in the pickup truck, sipping gas station coffee and nodding to the beat of a country song humming on the radio. How was class? He asked, not looking up. Good, Marcus lied. Yeah, good, Michael echoed. The truck rolled away, tires crunching the gravel, carrying them home to a house filled with warm lights and colder truths. Dinner was meatloaf and silence. Their mother, gone years ago from illness, used to fill these moments with questions and laughter. Now it was just David, a man made of calloused hands and rigid beliefs, who measured growth in silence and bruises. You boys keep working hard, he said between bites. Respect comes to those who earn it. The twins nodded, chewing through pain, nodding through resentment. Later that night, Marcus stood shirtless in front of the bathroom mirror, staring at the discolored patch along his ribcage. Michael leaned against the doorframe behind him. It still hurts, he asked. Marcus didn't answer. He lifted his arm, winced, and nodded slightly. Michael exhaled, jaw tight. They're not going to stop. I know. So what do we do? Marcus stared at his reflection. At the hollow under his eyes, the tension in his shoulders, the faint shimmer of humiliation behind his gaze. We don't give them what they want. And what do they want? Michael asked. Us gone. A beat of silence. Then we stay. The following days were a blur of repetition. Jab, cross, hook. Horse stance, hold. Breathe. Block. Absorb. Endure. Jake and Connor never missed a beat. Every opportunity to correct the twins' form was an excuse for a shove, a kick, a whispered insult. One day, Jake leaned in close during a drill and said, "Your daddy in jail? Or did your mama leave you with him?" Michael froze. Marcus reacted instantly, a surge of fury rising in his chest, but Sensei Mitchell's voice cut through before he could act. "Marcus, focus. Stop fidgeting." Jake smiled. Michael didn't blink. That night, Michael cried into his pillow. Not loud, not for long, but enough for Marcus to hear, enough to burn a hole in his heart. They didn't speak of it. The next class, Marcus held the horse stance until his legs trembled and his teeth clenched, never breaking eye contact with his own reflection. When Jake passed behind him, muttering, "Hope you like the view from the bottom," Marcus didn't flinch. That was the rule now. No reaction. No fuel. Just steel. But steel bends under pressure. During sparring drills, Connor accidentally elbowed Michael in the face, splitting his lip. Blood on the mat. Silence. Sensei Mitchell walked over, glanced at the wound, and said, "Control, Connor. Remember, this isn't full contact." "Sorry, Sensei," Connor said, feigning innocence. Marcus helped his brother to his feet, fury radiating through his fingertips. Later, in the locker room, Michael held a towel to his mouth. "It's not going to end." "It will," Marcus said. "When?" "When we make it." That night, Michael didn't cry. Instead, he stared at the ceiling and whispered, "I hate this place." Marcus stared too. "I hate that we have to prove we belong. I hate that they get to decide. Then maybe we stop letting them." The next morning, as they ate cereal in silence, David walked in, dressed in his worn military jacket, heading to a side job. He paused, noticed the swelling on Michael's lip. "What happened there?" "Caught an elbow," Michael replied, deadpan. "You gotta keep your guard up," David said, not unkindly, but not kindly either. "Those boys'll make you strong. Steel sharpens steel." "Yeah," Marcus said flatly. "They're definitely sharpening something." David grabbed his thermos. "Pain's part of growth. Remember that." And just like that, he was gone. The door shut. The truck rumbled away. The sound echoed in their bones. Marcus looked at his brother. What if he's wrong? What if pain isn't making us stronger? Michael replied. Just numb. They didn't have the answer, but they had resolve. That night, Marcus stood in the garage, punching the air, then the empty bag hanging from the ceiling. Sloppy. Weak. Useless. He hit again. Again. Until the pain in his hand was louder than the pain in his heart. Michael joined him, standing barefoot on the cold cement. No music. No words. Just the rhythm of two brothers trying to feel something other than helpless. The garage was dusty, dimly lit, cold, but it was the only space in the world that felt like theirs. Outside, the world saw them as those kids. Inside, they were warriors in training. That night, they didn't ask for permission. They made a silent pact. If the world wouldn't give them respect, they'd take it. But they'd do it on their terms. No rage. No revenge. Just resolve. The kind that can't be taught by belts or broken by bruises. The kind that rises quietly, invisibly, until it's unstoppable. The first cracks had formed. And the storm was coming. Monday came with the grayness of routine, but beneath that haze, something simmered. Marcus and Michael sat in the back seat of their father's truck, dressed in their crisp uniforms, bags packed neatly at their feet. David Thompson drove without much talk, his fingers drumming along the steering wheel to a rhythm only he heard. Stay sharp, he said, pulling into the dojo parking lot. You earn respect by showing up stronger than yesterday. The twins nodded like they always did. But as they stepped out and approached the dojo doors, their chests were tight with something their father couldn't see, dread layered under determination. Warrior's path looked the same, mirrored walls, wooden floors, and calligraphy scrolls that whispered tradition. But to the Thompsons, it had become a battlefield in disguise. A war fought not with guns, but with humiliation and silence. Instructors smiled like nothing was wrong. Students stretched and laughed. But Marcus knew better. Michael felt it too. The stares, the veiled whispers, the calculated indifference. Today would be no different. Or maybe it would be worse. They lined up with the others. Sensei Mitchell entered the room with his usual cold composure. Bow in. Everyone obeyed. The lesson began with stance drills, the kind meant to forge discipline. The twins dropped into horse stance, legs wide, thighs already burning. Jake Harrison leaned against the wall near the back, arms crossed, watching like a hawk circling wounded prey. Connor stood beside him, whispering something. They smirked in unison. Back straight, Mitchell barked. Sink lower, Thompson. No mention which one, because it didn't matter. To Mitchell, they were interchangeable, just two problems to be tolerated, not names to be respected. A half hour later, it was time for movement drills. Marcus and Michael partnered together, as always. It was their only defense, each other. No one else dared train with them. Keep your weight centered, Marcus whispered. Michael nodded, eyes focused, sweat already tracing his brow. In the mirror, they could see Jake and Connor paired up across the room, executing their drills with exaggerated ease, laughing loudly between sets. Then came the moment they'd been dreading. Switch partners, Mitchell called. Black belts take yellow belts. Build their confidence. The room shifted. Students glanced at one another. No one moved toward the twins. No one wanted to build them. Mitchell frowned. Jake, Connor, help the Thompsons. That sentence should have meant support. Instead, it was a death sentence. Marcus was sent to Jake. Michael to Connor. The energy changed immediately. We're going light, Mitchell warned. Focus on form, not power. But Jake's grin was wolfish. Don't worry, Sensei. We'll be gentle. The first hit came fast. Jake's jab was stiff, not meant to harm, just to rattle. Marcus absorbed it. The second punch, a cross, wasn't pulled. It struck hard against Marcus's collarbone. Too slow, Jake sneered. Gotta move, city boy. On the other side, Connor swept Michael's legs in a motion too aggressive for the drill. Michael hit the mat, air rushing from his lungs. No apology. Just a chuckle. The class continued around them like nothing was happening. No one interrupted. No one intervened. Mitchell stood just feet away, pretending not to see. Get up, Connor said, voice low, or maybe this isn't your place. Marcus lunged to help his brother, but Jake blocked him with a forearm. Let him figure it out. Or maybe you think he's too weak. You think this is funny? Marcus hissed. Think this is how warriors act? Jake leaned closer. Warriors win. Weaklings whine. The rest of the class passed in a blur of forced drills, bruises, and swallowed pride. When it finally ended, Marcus and Michael gathered their gear silently. Their bodies hurt, but it was the weight in their chests that crushed them. In the truck ride home, David glanced at them through the mirror. You boys okay? Fine, Marcus said. Yeah, Michael lied. David nodded, satisfied. You just have to tough it out. That's how I made it through boot camp. The comparison felt hollow. Boot camp had rules. Protocols. Supervision. This place had none of that. Just a code of silence, and a hierarchy that protected the worst under the guise of discipline. At home, dinner was leftovers. Conversation was minimal. Later, in their room, the twins sat in silence until Michael broke it. Do you think he really doesn't see it, Dad? Marcus asked. He sees what he wants to see. Honor. Discipline. Men becoming stronger. But this, it's not strength. It's cruelty. Then why do we keep going? Because we have to. Why? Marcus looked over. Because if we quit, they win. Michael nodded slowly, then said something so quiet Marcus barely heard it. I don't want to be angry anymore. Marcus stared at the ceiling. Me neither. But anger was all they had left. Not the kind that burned bright and fast, but the kind that smoldered in the dark, waiting. They didn't know when, or how, but something inside them had shifted. The war wasn't visible to the others. But for the twins, it was happening every minute they spent at Warrior's Path. And soon, they would stop playing defense. They wouldn't break. They would bend, quietly, with purpose, until it was time to snap back. The next week unfolded like clockwork: train, bruise, endure, repeat. Marcus and Michael had learned to breathe through pain, to mask the trembling in their limbs, to wear their composure like armor. But armor, no matter how thick, doesn't protect what's inside. It was a Thursday evening when the worst blow yet was dealt, not with fists, but with words. They were in the middle of a timing drill when Jake strolled past, leaned in toward Michael, and said under his breath, "Guess your kind just weren't built for discipline." Michael's reaction was instant but contained. He froze for half a second. His punch missed the pad. Marcus saw it. Felt it. Like a short circuit in their connection. He knew something had been said, something vile. The whole drill fell apart. Connor snorted, loud enough for others to hear. Guess you forgot which continent karate came from, monkey. The room didn't laugh. It just went silent. Not out of disapproval, out of discomfort. No one wanted to be part of this moment, but no one would stop it either. Marcus turned, his fists clenched so tight his nails dug into his palms. Michael's face was tight with shame, eyes flicking to the floor. And there was Sensei Mitchell, standing just a few feet away, watching it all with a dead-eyed expression like it was just another messy moment best left alone. Focus, he said simply. Back to drills. The rage that burned in Marcus wasn't loud. It was the kind that settled into your bones. That filled your chest with pressure so thick it was hard to breathe. They finished the class without another word. In the locker room, Michael sat on the bench staring at his hands. I almost swung, he whispered. I almost did it. Why didn't you? Marcus asked. Because I didn't want to give them the satisfaction. And now? Michael looked up, eyes glassy with tears he refused to shed. Now I just feel like I'm letting myself rot from the inside. That night, they didn't even try to hide their bruises. When David saw the swelling under Marcus's eye and the welt across Michael's back, he frowned. What happened now? Sparring, Marcus said. David squinted, something flickering behind his eyes. You sure that's all it is? It's under control, Marcus lied. We're handling it. David stared at them for a long moment, then nodded. All right. But if it gets worse, I'll talk to Mitchell myself. Michael nearly laughed. Don't bother. He's 10 feet away when it happens. And he never sees anything. Then why are we still going? David asked. The room fell quiet. Marcus answered slowly. Because quitting tells them we're exactly what they say we are. The next day, Marcus walked into the dojo with his chin higher than usual. Michael followed, every step heavy but purposeful. As they lined up, they met Jake's gaze. For the first time, they didn't look away. Jake smirked, but it didn't have the same edge. Maybe he noticed the difference. Maybe he didn't. During class, Connor tried another accidental sweep on Michael. This time, Michael didn't fall. He braced, pivoted, and used Connor's momentum to regain balance. No retaliation. Just control. It stung more than a punch. Lucky move, Connor muttered. You'll need more of those. Later, in the garage, Marcus and Michael trained without a word. They didn't talk about what had happened. They didn't analyze Jake's tone or Connor's look. They hit the heavy bag until their knuckles ached and their shoulders screamed. The only sound was the dull thud of impact and the sharp rhythm of their breath. They were shaping something in that garage, something stronger than muscle. They were sculpting resilience. Not the kind that wins trophies. The kind that survives humiliation and comes back clearer, sharper. The kind that makes the predator pause before striking. That night, after dinner, David watched them from the kitchen window. Two silhouettes in the garage, moving like ghosts in the dark. He opened the door and stepped out, crossing the driveway. "You boys are serious about this," he said. Marcus didn't stop punching. "We don't have a choice." Michael paused, wiping sweat from his brow. "They're trying to break us. And no one's going to stop them but us." David watched them a moment longer. "Then maybe it's time you started fighting back smarter. Not just harder." He turned back toward the house, then stopped. "Tomorrow," he said. "I'll show you a few things." The door closed behind him. The garage stayed quiet for a long while. Marcus and Michael stood in silence, breathing hard, hearts pounding, but steadier than before. A shift had occurred. No more hoping for rescue. No more waiting for someone to step in. The rage was still there, but now it had a direction. It wasn't about proving they belonged anymore. It was about proving that no one had the right to decide they didn't. The war was invisible to the others. But it was real. And now, they were training for it. Friday arrived with the kind of tension that stuck to the skin like humidity. Marcus and Michael didn't speak much during breakfast. Their father had left early for work, leaving behind a note that simply read, "Garage tonight. Be ready." The twins knew what that meant. David Thompson was a man of few words, but when he spoke in commands, they carried weight. At school, everything felt dulled, like they were ghosts walking through hallways of people who didn't see them. Teachers droned. Students laughed about parties they weren't invited to. But the dojo loomed in their minds like a storm cloud. That evening, they arrived earlier than usual. The dojo lights were already on, casting a warm glow through the windows that belied the coldness inside. They changed quickly, tying their yellow belts with mechanical precision. As they warmed up on the mat, they saw Jake and Connor arrive, swaggering as always. Jake locked eyes with Marcus and offered a slow, deliberate smile. The kind that didn't reach the eyes. Connor gave Michael a mock salute. It was going to be one of those nights. "Sparring drills today," Sensei Mitchell announced. "Controlled contact. Technique over strength." The twins exchanged a glance, subtle but loaded with meaning. They knew what was coming. It was never really about technique with those two. The students paired off, and predictably, Marcus found himself across from Jake, while Michael faced Connor. Sensei Mitchell stood by, arms crossed, eyes sweeping over the room with the detachment of a man watching a routine he'd seen 1,000 times before. "Begin," Mitchell called. Jake wasted no time. He launched into a combination that started clean but ended with a spinning kick that clipped Marcus's shoulder hard enough to make him stumble. "You're too slow," Jake said with mock concern. "You need to react better." Marcus steadied himself, face blank. "Just technique, right?" "Of course," Jake said, smiling. Across the mat, Michael was faring no better. Connor threw a knee that stopped just short of illegal, catching Michael in the hip. "Better guard that side," Connor taunted. "Wouldn't want to limp out of here." The room continued around them as if nothing was wrong. Other students sparred, laughed, encouraged one another. But around the twins, a bubble of silence formed, thick with discomfort no one dared puncture. Marcus blocked Jake's next punch and countered with a clean jab to the chest, nothing illegal, just firm. Jake's expression shifted. The sparring continued. The tempo quickened. Jake and Connor escalated. So did Marcus and Michael, but within the rules. Each blow was measured, disciplined. But inside, they were boiling. Then it happened. Jake threw a high roundhouse that barely grazed Marcus's head, more dangerous than necessary. Marcus stepped in, blocked it with his forearm, and used Jake's momentum to throw him slightly off balance. Jake stumbled back, surprised. "Careful," Marcus said, voice even. "You're losing your footing." Jake's eyes narrowed. Connor, now clearly frustrated, swept Michael's legs. Michael fell hard, landing flat on his back, gasping for breath. "Michael!" Marcus shouted, stepping forward instinctively. Jake moved to block him. "Stay in your lane." Marcus didn't back down. For a second, it looked like everything might explode. But then Mitchell stepped between them. "Enough," he barked. "Reset." Jake held his glare for a second longer before stepping back. Connor offered Michael a hand, which Michael ignored, getting up on his own. "Just trying to help," Connor muttered. "You dropped your guard." "In a real fight, that gets you hurt," Jake added, looking at Marcus. "Good thing this isn't real, huh?" The twins didn't reply. They returned to their starting positions, finished the drill, and bowed out with the rest of the class. As they gathered their gear, Marcus whispered to Michael, "You good?" "Yeah," Michael said, wiping blood from his lip. "Just tired of playing the punching bag." Outside, the cool night air hit their faces like a bomb. Their father's truck was already waiting. David didn't ask what happened. He didn't need to. He could see it in their posture, their eyes. Instead, when they got home, he said simply, "Garage." 5 minutes. The boys changed quickly and met him there. David stood in the center of the space, a heavy bag hanging behind him, focus mitts on the ground. "You said no one's protecting you in there," he began. "So let's make sure you don't need anyone to." What followed was an hour of precision. No flashy moves, no kata forms. Just raw, practical skill. How to block a cheap shot. How to pivot out of a corner. How to absorb a hit without showing it. David was calm, intense, and utterly focused. "They're not sparring with you," he said. "They're testing your limits. You need to show them you don't have any." Michael, wiping sweat from his brow, said, "We're not trying to hurt anyone." David's eyes were steady. "No. You're trying to end the fight before it starts. That's what real skill is." When the session ended, the twins were soaked in sweat but felt lighter, stronger. David placed a hand on each of their shoulders. "You're not victims," he said. "You're warriors. Start acting like it." That night, in bed, Marcus stared at the ceiling, thinking about Jake's expression when he had stumbled. It hadn't been anger. It had been surprise. And for the first time, he realized something important. Jake didn't expect them to fight back. And that made him vulnerable. Tomorrow, they would return to the dojo. Same uniforms. Same opponents. But something would be different. Because tonight, they hadn't just trained. They had decided. No more silent shame. No more surviving. The war would no longer be invisible. It had a shape now. A name. And it was preparing to strike back. Saturday morning broke with the scent of damp earth and rusted steel. Marcus and Michael stood in the driveway, watching their father haul an old punching dummy from the garage. It was sun-bleached and battered, its surface cracked from years of neglect, but David treated it like sacred relic. "Name it," he said. The twins exchanged a glance. "What?" "Give it a name," David repeated. You hit harder when it matters. Michael smirked, then said, Jake. Marcus nodded. Yeah. Jake. David cracked a rare grin. All right then. Let's see what you can do to Jake. What followed was the kind of training that didn't care about belts or ranks. This wasn't about kata forms or ceremonial bows, it was war school. David drilled them through blocks and counters, pivot steps and redirection strikes. A real fight isn't pretty, he said. You don't win with technique. You win with will. They trained until their shirts clung with sweat and their hands ached. No music. No talking. Just sweat, breath, and impact. By noon, Marcus's knuckles were raw. Michael's side throbbed from a misstep. But neither of them stopped. Not once. That afternoon, they didn't return to the dojo. It was their first missed session in months. And it felt like power. Like claiming something. That evening, David took them for a drive. Just the three of them. The truck smelled like leather, motor oil, and the quiet kind of pride David rarely spoke aloud. You boys ever been in a real fight? He asked suddenly. Marcus looked over. You mean outside the dojo? No. I mean the kind where the rules don't apply. Where you don't get points. You get broken noses. Broken pride. Michael hesitated. No, David nodded. That's what they're bringing to you. And what you have to understand is, most bullies aren't fighters. They're performers. They act tough until someone calls their bluff. And what if they're not bluffing? Marcus asked. David's voice was even. Then you don't outfight them. You outlast them. You make them realize you're the one thing they fear most, someone who won't break. The truck rolled past quiet homes, playgrounds filled with laughing kids, and into the part of town where streetlights flickered and sidewalks cracked. David parked outside a closed-down gym. This is where I learned, he said. Before the army. Before I had kids. My coach was a bastard. But he taught me one thing I never forgot. He turned to face them. Don't fight unless you have to. But if you have to, don't stop until they know it was a mistake. The sun dipped lower, casting shadows that stretched like scars across the dashboard. David started the truck again and turned home. That night, the garage became sacred ground. They trained until the moon was high. David said little, just adjusted their footing, corrected their angles, gave them nods when things clicked. And something did click. Not just the techniques. The mindset. The transformation was slow but undeniable. Their movements grew tighter. Their confidence less forced. And deep inside, something colder began to settle, a calm that only comes when you've accepted there's no one coming to save you. Sunday morning, David took them to the sporting goods store. Bought them their own gloves. Not dojo issued. Personal. Black leather. Worn tight. You'll need these, he said simply. In the parking lot, as they loaded gear into the truck, Marcus asked, "Why are you helping us now?" David closed the tailgate and leaned against it. Because I thought this was just about training. About discipline. But I was wrong. It's about survival. And I'll be damned if I let my sons fight a war I didn't teach them how to win. Michael swallowed the lump rising in his throat. So what now? David looked at both of them. Now we finish what they started. That night, as they wrapped their wrists in gauze and stood facing the heavy bag, Michael asked, "What happens when we win?" Marcus stared ahead, his fists clenched. Then we make sure no one else has to go through what we did. The bag swayed under the first punch. Then another. Then a flurry. Not anger. Not vengeance. Just precision. Focus. And somewhere in the background, the faint hum of an old diesel truck. The heartbeat of a father who, maybe too late, had finally shown up for the battle. The promise had been made. In steel. In sweat. In silence. And it was only just beginning. Monday arrived with no fanfare, just the dull ache of overworked muscles and the promise of another school day that neither Marcus nor Michael could focus on. Teachers spoke, bells rang, friends nodded in passing, but everything felt muted, like the world was on a different frequency. Because the real world, the one that mattered, was waiting in the garage. The dojo might have been where they were tested, but the garage was where they were made. That evening, as soon as they got home, they dropped their bags, grabbed their wraps, and headed to the sacred space behind the house where transformation waited. David was already there, setting up the focus mitts, his army boots tapping the concrete with impatient rhythm. "Tonight, you stop flinching," he said without greeting. "Tonight, you learn to hit back without thinking." The twins stepped into their stances, shoulders square, eyes focused. David called combos, jab, cross, hook, slip, counter, and they obeyed, fists snapping through air like hammers on steel. The mitts cracked under the force. David didn't praise. He corrected. He built. "You're not training to win matches," he barked. "You're training to win moments. Because in real fights, moments are all you get." They pushed through pain. When Marcus's arm cramped, he shook it out and kept punching. When Michael's lungs burned, he narrowed his focus to the sound of his feet on the floor. Sweat poured. Knuckles bled. Time warped. The garage was no longer a room, it was a forge, and they were steel being folded and hardened. David didn't stop them when they staggered. He didn't slow down when their punches weakened. He drove them harder. Again. Faster. Clean. At one point, Marcus caught a mitt wrong and his wrist bent awkwardly. He grunted in pain, but David said nothing. Just reset the mitt and raised it again. Marcus nodded and struck. Harder. More precise. By the time they finished, their shirts were soaked, and their breaths came in jagged pulls. David finally spoke, quieter this time. "You know what Jake and Connor are expecting?" The boys looked up. "They're expecting quitters. Performers. Not predators. What they don't know is that you've already decided not to break." He stepped back, arms crossed. "That makes you dangerous." Michael exhaled slowly, then said, "It doesn't feel like we're ready." David's gaze was steady. "No fighter ever feels ready. But you don't need to feel ready. You just need to know you won't stop." That night, after dinner, the twins sat on the roof outside their bedroom window, staring at the stars. It had become a ritual. Sitting there, legs swinging over the edge, talking about what was coming. "Do you think Mitchell knows what's going on?" Michael asked. "He knows," Marcus replied. "He just doesn't care. Or worse, he does care, but not about us." Michael was quiet for a moment. "I keep waiting for someone else to fix this. For something to change. But nothing changes unless we do it ourselves." "That's what Dad's been teaching us," Marcus said. "This isn't about justice. It's about strength. Not strength to hurt. Strength to stop being hurt. And if we go too far." Marcus turned. "Then maybe it was already too far the moment we stepped into that dojo." The next day at school, they walked the halls differently. Heads up. Shoulders back. They weren't swaggering or trying to act tough. But people noticed the shift. Subtle things, how they looked others in the eye, how they moved like they didn't need permission to exist. In gym class, when another student shoved Michael during a basketball scrimmage, Michael didn't shove back. He just stood there, eyes cold, unblinking. The kid backed off. Power didn't always need to shout. Sometimes, it just needed to exist. That night, the garage session changed. David brought out old pads, weighted vests, and timing drills that pushed them past exhaustion. He made them train with their eyes closed. Feel the movement. Hear the rhythm. React without thinking. At one point, Marcus collapsed to his knees. "I can't feel my arms," he gasped. David stood over him. "Can you still stand?" Marcus nodded. "Then do it." And he did. So did Michael. They stood. They punched. They endured. The night ended with silence, the kind only earned by people who had left everything on the floor. As they lay in bed later, both staring at the ceiling, Michael whispered, "What if we go back and it's the same?" "It won't be," Marcus said. "Because we're not." In that garage, something had changed. Not instantly. Not obviously. But permanently. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were preparing. Not for revenge. Not for some explosive moment of victory. But for the moment they would no longer be afraid. That was the promise they made to each other, in the silence between punches, in the air between breaths, in the echo of their father's voice. No more flinching. No more waiting. The garage wasn't just training them. It was awakening them. And the fire they built there was only getting hotter. Wednesday brought a false calm to Warrior's Path. The fluorescent lights buzzed their usual tune, the mats were clean, and Sensei Mitchell's voice echoed off the mirrored walls with routine authority. But beneath the surface, something was shifting, quiet, invisible, and irreversible. Marcus and Michael entered like they always did, bags over shoulders, heads held high, but there was a difference now, subtle but sharp. They weren't walking into a dojo anymore. They were walking into an arena. Jake and Connor lounged near the lockers, laughing over something neither of them actually found funny. When they saw the twins, Jake grinned like a predator spotting familiar prey. "Back again," he called. "Didn't expect to see you after last time. Thought maybe you'd taken up knitting." Connor snorted. "Or chess. Something safer." Marcus didn't reply. Michael didn't flinch. They passed straight by without slowing, like the words were wind through leaves. That silence unsettled Jake more than any comeback could have. The class began with warm-ups. Punch combinations, stance holds, push-ups. The twins flowed through each with machine precision. Not showing off, not rushing. Just efficient. Ruthless in their focus. Sensei Mitchell watched, and if he noticed the shift in their rhythm, he said nothing. "Sparring rotations," he finally called. "Same partners as last week." A ripple of murmurs passed through the room. Everyone knew what that meant. Everyone had seen what sparring had become. But no one said anything. They never did. Marcus squared up with Jake. Michael faced Connor. Jake bounced lightly on his feet, smirking. Ready to cry in front of everyone again. Marcus said nothing. Just raised his gloves. The bell rang. Jake came in hard, 3 quick jabs and a low kick, fast and mean. Marcus blocked the first 2, slipped the third, and sidestepped the kick with a grace that didn't belong to a yellow belt. He countered with a clean jab to Jake's shoulder, not enough to bruise, just enough to say, "I'm here now." Jake's eyes narrowed. He came again, faster, more aggressive. Marcus blocked, absorbed, returned fire with a palm heel to the chest that pushed Jake back a step. Not illegal. Just unexpected. Across the room, Michael ducked Connor's wild right hook and returned a body shot that forced air from Connor's lungs. Still within the rules. Still calm. But this time, the crowd noticed. There were no taunts, no laughter. Just the sharp silence of students watching something shift before their eyes. Jake lunged again, but Marcus was ready. He moved like water, redirecting the momentum, catching Jake's arm and guiding him off balance. Jake stumbled. Again. And when he looked up, Marcus was already back in stance, breathing slow, eyes locked. For the first time, Jake looked unsure. The round ended. Mitchell called time. The twins stepped back, bowed, and returned to the edge of the mat. The class resumed. Other matches began. But no one was watching them. All eyes were still on the Thompsons. After class, as they changed in the locker room, Connor approached Michael. "You've been training outside," he said flatly. Michael looked at him, expression unreadable. "We train to survive." "Not dojo training," Connor pressed. "That's not what Mitchell teaches." "Maybe that's the problem," Michael replied, closing his locker. Jake stormed in a moment later, his face tight with something that looked like shame wrapped in fury. "What are you trying to prove?" he snapped at Marcus. "That you're better than me?" "I'm not trying to prove anything," Marcus said quietly. "I'm just tired of being your warm-up dummy." Jake stepped forward, fists clenched. "You don't belong here." "Then why are you the one who's off balance?" The silence after that was heavy. For a moment, it looked like Jake might throw a punch. But he didn't. He turned and stormed out instead. Later that night, in the garage, David stood silently as his sons worked the bag. He didn't speak until the final set was done. "Something changed today," he said. Marcus nodded. "They're starting to notice." "Good. That means you're getting close. But stay sharp. The more threatened people feel, the more reckless they get." Michael wiped sweat from his brow. "We didn't hit hard. We stayed in bounds." "That's what scares them," David said. "You beat them without breaking rules. That means they can't accuse you of anything. And they hate that." He paused. "That's when they get dangerous." That night, as the boys lay in bed, Marcus whispered, "Did you see Jake's face?" Michael nodded in the dark. "He looked scared." "Good," Marcus said. "Now he knows we're not playing anymore." "But he's not done." "You saw it." "Yeah. He's going to try something. Then we'll be ready." In the shadows of that room, two brothers smiled, not from joy, but from something deeper. The kind of satisfaction that comes when you taste the beginning of respect forged from fire. The kind of smile that says, "Come at us again. We're not afraid of bleeding anymore." Thursday's sky was overcast, heavy and indifferent. It mirrored the weight in Marcus and Michael's chests as they walked through the school parking lot, past the chain-link fences, past the same students who never spoke to them but always watched. Whispers followed them more now, not in mockery, but in awe. Something had shifted in the air. But with that shift came tension, thick, buzzing, waiting to snap. The dojo that evening felt tighter, as if the walls themselves were bracing for impact. Sensei Mitchell called them into warm-ups, his tone clipped, eyes sharper than usual. He had noticed. Everyone had. The twins weren't just surviving anymore, they were outmatching. The class went through forms, then strength drills, and when sparring rounds were announced, there was a brief hesitation. Mitchell looked at the twins, then at Jake and Connor, and said, "Switch it up today. Jake, you take Michael. Connor, you're with Marcus." The switch was unexpected. Intentional. The message was clear, let's see what you really learned. As they bowed to their new opponents, the air thickened. Michael's heart beat in his ears, not from fear, but from that electric anticipation right before something breaks. Jake wore a mask of calm, but Michael saw it, the tightness in his jaw, the twitch in his eye. He wasn't there to spar. He was there to destroy. The match began. Jake attacked immediately, combination after combination, trying to overwhelm with speed. Michael absorbed the rhythm, blocking, slipping, moving with precision. But Jake was fast, stronger than before, more reckless. A roundhouse grazed Michael's ribs and nearly took him off his feet. He countered with a low strike to Jake's thigh, legal, but firm. Jake stumbled. His face twisted. Then it happened. Jake's fist came fast, too fast for control, and landed directly on Michael's solar plexus. The air vanished from his lungs. He dropped to one knee, gasping. Across the room, Marcus saw red. He stepped forward, but Connor blocked him, smirking. "Stay out of it," he said. "Or what?" Marcus growled. "You gonna show me how a coward fights?" Connor shoved him. Not playfully. Not subtly. A real shove. Marcus didn't stumble. He launched. In one fluid motion, he dropped his weight, pivoted, and drove his shoulder into Connor's chest, sending him reeling backward onto the mat. The entire dojo froze. Students stared. Even Mitchell didn't speak at first. Michael struggled to his feet, breath returning in shaky gulps. Jake stood over him, fists still clenched. "You dropped your guard," he said coldly. "In a real fight, that gets you hurt." Marcus crossed the room in 3 strides, eyes blazing. "Then maybe it's time for a real fight." Mitchell finally snapped back into motion. "Enough. Everyone off the mat." Voices rose. Students whispered. The illusion of control shattered. Jake stepped toward Marcus, but Mitchell barked again, louder. "I said enough." The class ended in chaos. In the locker room, as they gathered their things, Jake's voice cut through the air. "You think this is over?" Marcus turned slowly. "No. I think it's just beginning." That night, their father stood in the garage, staring at the bruises blooming on his sons' bodies. David's eyes darkened. He didn't speak for a long time. Then, quietly, he said, "I'm speaking to Mitchell tomorrow." "He won't care," Marcus replied. "He'll pretend he didn't see it. Then I'll make him see." "And if he doesn't listen?" Michael asked. David's voice dropped to a low, lethal calm. "Then we handle it ourselves." He walked into the garage, opened the old army trunk in the corner, and pulled out the mitts and weighted vests. "We're done playing nice." That night's training was different. No instructions. Just intensity. Marcus and Michael struck harder, moved faster, pushed past the edge of exhaustion. Their father said only one thing before they collapsed. "Pain is the price. But dignity is not negotiable." They lay on the mat, bodies screaming, hearts thundering, and in the silence between breath, they made a decision. No more letting it slide. No more swallowing shame. Next time they stepped into the dojo, it wouldn't be to prove anything. It would be to take everything back. The last straw had fallen. Now it was time to set the fire. Friday afternoon brought an unfamiliar chill, as if even the weather sensed something inevitable was coming. David Thompson stood outside the dojo in his faded army jacket, arms folded, eyes locked on the entrance like a man preparing for a siege. Inside, the floor thudded with the sound of training, but his focus was on a different kind of confrontation. When he stepped through the doors, the atmosphere shifted. Parents glanced up. Students paused. Even Sensei Mitchell straightened. "Mr. Thompson," Mitchell said, his tone polite but guarded. "Can I help you?" "We need to talk," David replied. "Privately." Mitchell gestured toward his office, a small room off the main floor lined with trophies and certificates. They entered. The door closed behind them with a soft but final click. "If this is about the boys, I assure you we're pushing them with the same expectations as everyone else," Mitchell began. "This isn't about expectations," David said evenly. "This is about abuse." Mitchell's smile was tight. "I think there's been some misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding," David cut in. "I've seen the bruises. I've heard what was said. I've watched your black belts target my sons while you stood 10 feet away and did nothing." Mitchell's expression hardened. "Sparring can be intense. Boys misinterpret firm instruction, call it what you want. But last night, Jake Harrison punched Michael full force in the solar plexus. Marcus was blocked from helping him. Your class turned into a street fight and you did nothing. Again. A pause. Mitchell leaned back. What would you like me to do, Mr. Thompson? David's voice lowered into something colder than anger. Transfer those boys. Discipline them publicly. Make it clear that harassment ends here. Mitchell hesitated, weighing options. That's a delicate situation. Jake and Connor have been with us for years. Their families contribute, so that's it, David said flatly. They bought the right to hurt other kids. You're twisting my words. No, David said, standing now. I'm clarifying them. If you won't protect my sons, I will. Whatever it takes. Mitchell rose slowly. Are you threatening me? David's eyes didn't flinch. I'm warning you. Don't confuse the two. Outside, the class had resumed. Through the glass panel, David could see Marcus and Michael running drills with other students, their movements sharp, controlled, calculated. Across the mat, Jake and Connor stood with their usual smug confidence. But it wouldn't last. Not anymore. David opened the office door and stepped out, walking past the students without a glance. As he exited the dojo, parents stared. One even whispered his name. The tension he left behind was thick enough to taste. That night, at home, he said only 3 words. Start the clock. In the garage, the twins stood ready before he even turned on the light. They trained harder than ever. The drills became punishments. The punishment became power. Their fists moved like machines. Their feet glided across the concrete like dancers over glass. No wasted motion, David said. No hesitation. You don't fight to hurt. You fight to finish. Marcus's knuckles split. Michael's shins bruised. They didn't stop. The garage roared with impact. Sweat dripped like rain. Pain became a language. And by the end of the session, they spoke it fluently. Afterward, they sat on the garage floor, backs against the wall, breathing heavy. David stood above them, arms crossed. You're ready. For what? Marcus asked. David looked him in the eye. To show them who you really are. Upstairs, the phone rang. It was Richard Harrison, Jake's father. David didn't answer. He didn't need to. Whatever was coming, he knew the lines had already been drawn. In that garage, surrounded by worn equipment and the smell of blood and steel, the Thompson family wasn't training anymore. They were preparing. Not for survival. For reckoning. And when it came, there'd be no misunderstanding. There'd only be truth, and bruises, and justice. The Tri-County Open was held every spring in a community gym that reeked of disinfectant and dreams. For most kids, it was a chance to show off to their families, maybe win a plastic trophy, maybe make a memory. But for Marcus and Michael, it was a battlefield dressed as an event. David Thompson registered his sons 2 days before the brackets closed. He didn't ask permission. He didn't explain. He simply walked into the registration office, handed in the forms, and said, "They're entering the open division." The clerk blinked. "Your boys are still yellow belts." David's eyes didn't move. "And they're ready." The news spread fast. By the time Saturday rolled around, half the dojo already knew the Thompsons were stepping into a division most kids didn't attempt until they wore green or blue. Jake and Connor laughed it off. Open division. Jake snorted. They'll get chewed up. Connor smirked. They won't last around. But something in their voices was hollow. There was an edge to the laughter now, a nervousness they couldn't admit out loud. Because deep down, they'd seen the change. The twins didn't move like yellow belts anymore. They moved like wolves in borrowed clothing. The night before the tournament, the garage was silent. No training. No drills. Just quiet preparation. David handed each son a small envelope. Inside were notes, simple, handwritten, phrases that burned. Marcus, never forget how they looked at you when you were weak. Michael, let your silence speak louder than their noise. No speeches. No drama. Just reminders. At dawn, they loaded the truck. Gloves, uniforms, mouthguards. Water bottles and wraps. The sun was still low when they arrived at the gym, but already the parking lot buzzed with energy. Inside, the gymnasium buzzed with fluorescent lights and nervous chatter. Mats had been taped down. Brackets posted. Banners fluttered. Parents held phones like shields. Kids paced. Coaches shouted instructions. The Thompsons moved through it all like ghosts. No fear. No excitement. Just readiness. When they checked in, the volunteer frowned. Yellow belts. In open. That's right, Marcus said. The man shrugged. Your funeral. But when the match pairings were announced, the whispers started. Jake versus Marcus. Connor versus Michael. First round. Everyone looked up. Even the other instructors raised eyebrows. That's not a bracket, someone murmured. That's a setup. Jake grinned from across the gym. You ready to bleed in front of strangers? Marcus didn't respond. He just walked toward the mat. Across the way, Michael tightened his gloves. Connor cracked his neck theatrically, but his eyes darted more than usual. The crowd gathered. Phones came out. Parents leaned forward. The ref called out. Competitors to the center. Bow to your opponent. Marcus bowed. Slow. Deep. Jake gave a mock dip of his head. Fighters ready, the ref asked. Marcus's body coiled like a spring. Begin. Jake lunged, leading with a snapping front kick. But Marcus wasn't there. He slid sideways, pivoted, and countered with a back fist that clipped Jake's temple. Legal. Precise. The crowd gasped. Jake recovered, snarled, and charged again, hook, jab, low kick. Marcus blocked all three, then stepped inside and launched a body blow that echoed. Jake staggered. The ref called, point, Thompson. Jake's mouth curled into disbelief. Lucky shot. But his eyes betrayed panic. Across the room, Michael stood opposite Connor. The same call. Begin. Connor struck first, a flurry of punches, but Michael ducked the first, absorbed the second, and countered with a sweep that knocked Connor off his rhythm. Then a knee strike to the side, perfect form, no wasted movement. Point, Thompson. It wasn't just the points. It was the silence that followed. No one expected it. Not from yellow belts. Not from them. And yet, there they were, dominant. Calm. Unshaken. Jake came harder in round 2, fury overtaking form. He swung wide, hoping to crush, to humiliate. But Marcus moved like smoke. His footwork was flawless. His strikes cleaner. He wasn't sparring. He was outclassing. One final throw, a hip toss that left Jake flat on the mat, gasping. The crowd roared. Point. Match. Thompson wins. On the other side, Connor tried to retaliate with brute force, but Michael sidestepped, grabbed his arm, spun him, and landed a blow to the back shoulder. Point. Match. Thompson wins. It was over. 2 victories. First round. Against black belts. The gym erupted. Parents whispered. Students stared. Coaches checked the brackets again. No one could believe it. As the twins walked off the mat, the ref asked, "Where'd you two learn to fight like that?" Marcus smiled faintly. "We stopped trying to be accepted. And started preparing to be feared," Michael added. Across the gym, Jake sat on the floor, face pale, chest heaving. Connor looked lost. The brothers didn't look back. There was no gloating. No celebration. Just stillness. Control. Victory. David met them by the bleachers, eyes gleaming with pride. "You did it," he said. "We're not done," Marcus replied. This was just round one. And he was right. Because the storm they'd been weathering for months had just shifted direction. And now, it was blowing back toward the ones who had created it. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The morning after their first round victories was quiet, not with rest but with anticipation sharpened to a razor's edge. Marcus and Michael rose before the sun, their bodies sore, their minds electric. The silence in their small kitchen wasn't emptiness, it was focus. David watched them move with the practiced rhythm of soldiers preparing for battle. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. The air carried more weight than any lecture could. At the tournament venue, the gym was already pulsing with energy. Day 2 meant semi-finals and finals, higher stakes, louder crowds, fewer chances to hide. But the Thompsons didn't come to hide. They came to finish what had begun. The announcer's voice rang out over the speaker system, calling competitors by division and match number. Parents filled the bleachers with coffees in hand and nervous tension in their throats. Coaches barked last-minute advice. And in the midst of it all, Marcus and Michael stood like anchors in a shifting tide, still, centered, lethal. The brackets were updated. New opponents this time. Higher ranked, heavier, faster. But it didn't matter. The twins had crossed the threshold where belts no longer dictated outcomes. The moment their feet touched the mat, they weren't yellow belts. They were inevitability. Marcus was called first. His opponent was Kyle Simmons, a brown belt known for speed and deceptive footwork. The match began with fireworks. Kyle launched into a flurry of strikes, testing for weaknesses. Marcus didn't retreat. He absorbed, redirected, responded. His counters were surgical, small, precise, punishing. Kyle tried a spinning back kick. Marcus anticipated, sidestepped, and landed a body shot that knocked the wind from Kyle's lungs. Point, Thompson. Kyle shook it off and pressed forward with a desperate rush. That was his mistake. Marcus dropped low, swept his leg, and sent him sprawling to the mat. Point. Match. Thompson advances. As Marcus stepped off the mat, he didn't raise his hands. No celebration. Just a glance across the gym to where Michael waited. Silent confirmation. Your turn. Michael's match was against Trevor Nguyen, a second-degree black belt with a reputation for ruthlessness in open division. The crowd leaned in. Whispers filled the room. No one expected Michael to survive. The bell rang. Trevor didn't hesitate, he came in like a wrecking ball. But Michael was ice. Calm. He absorbed a high kick, ducked under the follow-up, and delivered a counter elbow to the ribs that made Trevor grunt and backpedal. Point, Thompson. The gym erupted in disbelief. Trevor snarled and attacked again, more aggressive now, throwing a punch that skirted the edge of illegal. Michael didn't flinch. He pivoted, grabbed Trevor's GI, and flipped him clean over his hip. The impact was thunderous. Point. Match. Thompson advances. By midday, the brackets were updated again, and the reality settled over everyone like a fog. The finals would be a rematch. Jake versus Marcus. Connor versus Michael. Two rivalries. 2 scores to settle. 1 mat. Back in the prep area, David approached his sons. "You know what this means," he said. "Yeah," Marcus replied. "No mistakes. No mercy," Michael added. "No anger," David corrected. "They'll come for your heads. Don't give them the satisfaction of seeing you lose control. Stay sharp. Stay clean. Let the results speak." The time came. The crowd packed in. Even those from other divisions stopped to watch. Phones were up. The story had spread, 2 yellow belts cutting through the open division like wildfire. And now, the final test. Jake entered first, stretching his shoulders, jaw tight. He looked across the mat at Marcus with a glare sharpened by wounded pride. Marcus stepped up, loose, calm, gloves tight. They bowed. The bell rang. Jake exploded. Hooks, jabs, low kicks, one after the other, fast and brutal. Marcus absorbed, blocked, returned fire. A counter cross landed. Jake stumbled. The crowd roared. "Point, Thompson." Jake gritted his teeth and swung wide, trying to land something, anything to shake Marcus's rhythm. But Marcus wasn't a target anymore. He was a blade. He moved with the patience of someone who had nothing left to prove, only justice to deliver. Jake charged again. Marcus timed it perfectly, duck, sidestep, and slam. A body shot folded Jake in half. Point. Match. Thompson wins. Jake collapsed to his knees, eyes wide with disbelief. Across the mat, Connor faced Michael. It was pure fury. Connor came in with bad intent, nearly losing control from the start. He landed a hit early, too hard, too high. The ref warned him. Michael nodded silently and adjusted. Next exchange, Michael struck low, swept the leg, then tapped Connor in the chest with a follow-up punch. Point, Thompson. Connor screamed and rushed. Michael pivoted and flipped him, sending him skidding across the mat. Point. Match. Thompson wins. The gym exploded. Not just cheers, but shock. 2 yellow belts. 2 victories. 2 legends born in real time. David stood in the crowd, jaw clenched, pride radiating from every line in his face. He didn't smile. He nodded. Because it wasn't luck. It wasn't chance. It was preparation. Pain. Purpose. After the medals were handed out, the twins stood at the center of the mat. Reporters approached. Parents whispered. But they didn't bask in the spotlight. They didn't pose. They bowed, one last time, and walked away. Because the real win wasn't the tournament. It was the message. They had survived the fire. And now, they were the storm. The ride home from the tournament was silent, but it wasn't empty. It was loaded with something that simmered beneath the surface of every breath, satisfaction sharpened by memory. Marcus sat in the passenger seat of the truck, his metal cool against his chest under the sweatshirt. Michael leaned against the window in the back seat, eyes watching the streetlights flash by like quiet sentinels. David drove with one hand on the wheel, the other occasionally tapping the dashboard in a rhythm only he seemed to understand. No one said the words, "We did it." No one needed to. The moment they stepped through the front door, David turned to them and said simply, "You boys changed today." Marcus nodded. "We didn't fight like yellow belts." "That's because you're not," David replied. "Not anymore." The next morning, the story had already spread across town. Footage of the matches had made its way online, uploaded by parents, shared by students, dissected by viewers who couldn't believe what they were seeing. 2 yellow belts dismantling higher ranks with clinical precision, no theatrics, no drama, just dominance. At Millbrook High, the change was immediate. People stared. People nodded. People gave space. No more whispers behind lockers. No more sideways comments in the cafeteria. Even teachers who'd barely acknowledged them before suddenly asked how the tournament went. But beneath all that attention lay something darker, the wounded pride of two families who had invested years, money, and prestige into building champions, and watched it all crumble in a single weekend. Jake and Connor didn't show up Monday morning. Rumors swirled. Concussion. Sprained shoulder. Too embarrassed to face anyone. None of it mattered. Because in the eyes of the school, and the community, the story had already been written. The Thompsons hadn't just won. They had flipped the script. But power, once seized, demands protection. That afternoon, David sat them down at the kitchen table. Winning was the easy part, he said. Now comes the hard part. Michael looked confused. We already beat them. You beat them in front of a crowd. You humiliated them without breaking the rules. That's worse than a loss. That's exposure. So what? Marcus said. We earned that. You did, David nodded. But pride is dangerous. Especially when it belongs to people who've never been told no. That night, they trained like the threat hadn't passed. Because it hadn't. Every punch on the bag carried a new kind of urgency. Every step on the mat felt like part of a chess match with invisible opponents. Across town, in a mansion wrapped in silence and shame, Richard Harrison paced the marble floor of his living room like a general whose army had just been routed. Bill Mills sat nearby, face flushed with anger and disbelief. We invested 7 years, Richard growled. Private lessons, gear, flights, tournaments. For what? To be taken down by a pair of yellow belts. They cheated, Bill said, his voice brittle. No one fights like that without illegal training. And that father of theirs? Richard's voice lowered. He's the real problem. Military background. Discipline. That garage probably looks like a damn boot camp. What do? We take back control. The next day, Sensei Mitchell called David. The conversation was short. Tense. Full of surface-level courtesy and thinly veiled warnings. There's concern from the board, Mitchell said. About what? About the integrity of the program. Your sons have clearly advanced beyond their ranking. People are asking questions. Let them, David replied. They trained harder than anyone. They earned every point. Still, there's a process. Advancement must be documented. Supervised. Verified. Sounds like excuses. Sounds like a warning, Mitchell said, then hung up. David stared at the phone. Then at the wall. Then out the window where Marcus and Michael were sprinting through their daily conditioning circuit. They weren't just boys anymore. They were warriors born of necessity. And the storm that had once threatened to swallow them was now circling back, wounded and furious. Later that night, Michael asked, "Do you think it's really over?" David shook his head. No. And that's why we don't let up. Marcus tightened the wraps around his hands. Let them come. This time, we're ready. And they were. But neither of them saw what was already being set in motion. Because humiliation has a way of breeding something worse than revenge. It breeds planning. Quiet, patient, ruthless planning. The fire that once burned inside the Thompson garage had spilled into the world, and now, it was illuminating enemies they hadn't even realized were still watching from the shadows. The dojo was quieter than usual that Thursday evening, though no one said why. The parents in the observation area sat straighter, talked less. The students whispered in pairs, casting glances not at the sensei, but at Marcus and Michael. The Thompsons didn't need to ask. They could feel it in the air, resentment wrapped in curiosity, tension under smiles. The twins warmed up in sync, just like always. Same stretches, same breath control, same unshakable bond. But behind the mirrors, behind every polished movement, they were scanning, watching for the storm they knew was coming. Jake and Connor arrived late. Their uniforms were immaculate, not a wrinkle in sight. They walked like champions returning from exile, heads high, smiles wide, but the glint in their eyes betrayed something else, something colder. When Jake locked eyes with Marcus, it was like two lions circling the same carcass. Neither blinked. Neither broke. Sensei Mitchell clapped his hands. Sparring drills tonight. Pacing, footwork, defensive counters. Choose your partners. The room hesitated. No one moved. Jake stepped forward. Thompson, he called across the mat. You and me. Marcus nodded once. Michael turned to Connor, who was already moving toward him. The matches weren't scheduled. They weren't approved. But everyone knew this was what they came for. Mitchell didn't stop them. Didn't object. He simply stepped back. Light contact, he said. This is still a drill. The twins stepped onto the mat, eyes forward, hearts slow, minds locked into the zone only forged by fire. The ref called the signal. Jake lunged immediately, throwing a sharp side kick meant to test. Marcus blocked, returned with a hook that caught Jake on the shoulder. Legal. Jake sneered. That all you've got? Marcus didn't answer. He didn't need to. He was conserving. Watching. Jake came again, jab, jab, low kick. Marcus absorbed, returned a jab cross hook combo, and pivoted out. Clean. Sharp. Calculated. Then Jake slipped. Just enough to expose his ribs. And Marcus saw it. No hesitation. He stepped in and drove an elbow into the side of Jake's torso. The thud echoed off the walls. Jake crumpled, gasping, face twisting in pain and rage. Point, the ref called hesitantly, but Jake shoved himself back up. No point, he spat. Cheap shot. Marcus stood still, breathing steady. It was clean. Jake charged again, eyes wild. The crowd tensed. His punch missed wide, and Marcus caught him with another counter, an inside elbow that clipped the chin just enough to send Jake stumbling. Point, Thompson, the ref said again. But now Jake wasn't hearing the points. He was seeing red. He lunged recklessly, and Marcus knew, this wasn't sparring anymore. This was personal. Jake's next punch came hard, but Marcus ducked under it and countered with a sweep. Jake hit the mat. Hard. Match. The word hung in the air. Jake didn't get up right away. The gym was silent. Then Jake's father appeared at the edge of the mat. Richard Harrison. Expensive jacket, expensive shoes, expensive scowl. That's enough, he barked. This is nonsense. Marcus stepped back, bowed once, and walked off the mat. Michael's match with Connor was still going, but now all eyes were shifting. Connor's strikes had grown sloppier. His balance uneven. Michael's defense was surgical. Then came the turning point. Connor attempted a spinning back fist, overextended, and Michael ducked under it, caught his midsection, and took him to the mat with a smooth judo throw. Point. Match. Thompson. Connor sat up, blinking. Disbelief. Humiliation. And right then, his father, Bill Mills, stormed to the edge of the floor. This is a setup, he yelled. These kids aren't yellow belts. This is illegal training. Fraud. The dojo exploded with murmurs. Sensei Mitchell held up his hand. Enough. You allowed this, Richard hissed. You let them humiliate our boys. You let them steal the spotlight. They fought clean, Mitchell said, but his voice lacked conviction. David appeared at the back of the dojo. He hadn't planned to watch this time, but something told him to come anyway. He stepped forward. Is there a problem? Richard turned. You've trained these boys outside the dojo. You've created a circus. David's voice was ice. I trained them to survive your sons. That's not a circus. That's parenting. This isn't over, Bill Mills growled. No, David said calmly. But it is for your boys. The crowd parted as David walked to his sons. They stood beside him, calm, sweat dripping down their faces, but victorious in a way no metal could measure. Mitchell looked like he wanted to vanish. The other parents avoided eye contact. The Thompson family left together, walking through the storm they'd created, heads high. They didn't need permission. They didn't need approval. They had earned something more lasting, fear, respect, and the kind of silence that follows a reckoning. Because when the elbow landed and Jake fell, it wasn't just a match ending. It was the old hierarchy crumbling, one strike at a time. The weekend arrived, but there was no peace in its silence. The victories had been clean, but the wounds left behind were raw, deep, and festering. Marcus and Michael went through their morning training routine in the garage, but something felt different now. The excitement of victory had faded. In its place was a sense of tightening coils, of something looming just beyond the edge of vision. David sensed it too. His posture was more rigid. His gaze lingered longer when he looked out the windows. The twins didn't ask, but they knew, this wasn't over. Sunday brought an invitation to an exhibition match organized by a regional martial arts association. No stakes. No trophies. Just a friendly demonstration. Mitchell approached the twins after their final Saturday class. You've been requested, he said. Showcase your talent. Smooth things over. Marcus and Michael exchanged a glance. They knew what this was. A stage. A setup. But they nodded anyway. We'll be there, Michael said. Sunday afternoon, the gym was packed again. Not as chaotic as the tournament, but the tension was heavier. Too many familiar faces. Too many people who hadn't said a word when it counted. Mitchell greeted them with a tight smile. Just light contact today. Demonstration only. The boys nodded, said nothing. Jake and Connor were already warming up across the room. Their faces unreadable, too calm. Too controlled. The crowd settled. The announcer called the matches. The Thompsons would spar each other first, an odd decision, but Marcus understood. Divide them. Isolate them. Set a tone. The match began. Controlled, fluid, familiar. Marcus and Michael moved like mirrored flames, their bodies in perfect sync, exchanging strikes, blocks, feints, all with expert precision. The crowd was stunned silent. It wasn't aggression, it was art. And then came the switch. Now, the announcer said, a quick rematch from our Tri-County Finals, Jake Harrison versus Marcus Thompson. Jake stepped forward, eyes hollow. Marcus walked slowly to the mat, heart steady, every sense on alert. The ref called for a bow. They bowed. The match began. Jake rushed forward faster than expected, his movements clean, legal. For the first 30 seconds, it felt real. Until it didn't. Jake suddenly faked a low kick and launched a straight punch aimed high, far too high. It connected with Marcus's headgear, rattling him. The ref shouted, light contact, but Jake didn't stop. A second hit came, harder. Marcus stumbled. The crowd gasped. Before Marcus could recover, Jake swept the leg, knocking him to the mat. The ref started forward, too late. Jake lunged again, this time with an elbow that was anything but a demonstration. But Marcus rolled, absorbed the hit into his shoulder, and sprang to his feet. You want a real fight? Marcus hissed. Let's go. The ref tried to step in, but suddenly Connor sprinted in from the side, charging at Michael who had just re-entered the warm-up area. A tackle. A fist. Then chaos. The crowd exploded into screams. Parents stood. Phones rose. The twins were ambushed, off guard but not unprepared. Michael absorbed Connor's punch, returned a cross to the jaw that knocked him backward. Marcus caught Jake's arm mid-swing and countered with a throw that slammed Jake to the mat with enough force to knock the wind from his lungs. The ref was shouting. Officials rushed in. David pushed through the crowd just as Jake tried to rise again, wild-eyed and bleeding from a busted lip. "Stop," David growled, voice like a thunderclap. Jake froze. Connor moaned from the floor. Mitchell looked horrified. The match was over, but the consequences were just beginning. In the aftermath, David stormed into the officials' room with his sons behind him. "You let this happen," he snapped. "You approved this setup. You gave my sons to these animals." One official stammered. "It was supposed to be controlled. You put them in a cage and handed the keys to two cowards who couldn't stand losing." Outside, Jake and Connor's parents arrived, shouting at everyone, accusing the Thompsons of faking their ranks, of manipulating the system. But the crowd wasn't buying it. They'd seen what happened. Videos were already circulating. Jake and Connor didn't look like champions anymore. They looked like desperate bullies finally exposed for what they were. A reporter who had covered the Tri-County tournament pulled David aside. "You going to press charges?" David shook his head. "No. We're going to do something better." "What's that?" "We're going to let the truth bury them." That night, in the safety of their garage, Marcus sat on the bench, his shirt stained with dried sweat and a smear of blood. Michael tossed him a towel. "We didn't start that," Michael said. "No," Marcus replied, wiping his face. "But we ended it." David stood in the doorway, arms crossed, the hint of pride in his expression barely contained. "They wanted to remind you of your place," he said. "You just reminded them you don't have one. You make your own." And they had. Not with hate. Not with rage. But with control. Discipline. Strength forged under pressure. The cheap shots had failed. The chaos had collapsed. And the brothers stood taller than ever, unshaken, undefeated, and unafraid. Monday morning came with headlines. Not newspaper headlines, not yet, but the digital kind that spread like wildfire. TikToks showing Jake and Connor charging. Instagram reels capturing Marcus's flawless counter. Tweets flooded with clips titled, "Yellow Belts Go Terminator on Black Belts," and, "Karate Match Turns Real, You Won't Believe Who Won." Within 24 hours, the internet had declared a winner, and it wasn't the legacy students. Marcus and Michael sat in homeroom that morning, the world buzzing around them. Kids who hadn't spoken a word to them all year were now nodding, offering quiet fist bumps, or just staring with a mix of awe and guilt. It wasn't just respect, it was recognition. People saw them now. But not everyone celebrated. That afternoon, as they walked home, David's phone buzzed with a voicemail from Sensei Mitchell. He played it on speaker. "Mr. Thompson, I've been contacted by the Regional Martial Arts Council. There's concern over the incident. Videos are everywhere. We need to discuss how to proceed with damage control." David ended the call without replying. He already knew what that meant: politics. Protecting donors. Blaming the victims. The following evening, Mitchell requested a meeting. David arrived with both sons in tow. The dojo office felt smaller now. Mitchell looked tired. Nervous. "I want to be clear," he began, "I never condoned what happened Sunday." "But you allowed it," David said coldly. "You stood by while two boys who've harassed my sons for months turned a demonstration into an ambush." "There's pressure from the top," Mitchell continued, avoiding eye contact. "Jake and Connor's parents are threatening to sue. They're saying your sons have been secretly training outside the curriculum. They have, David said. With me. In my garage. To protect themselves from your silence. That may be, but I need to make a formal statement to the council. Something balanced. Fair. No, Marcus said. The room turned. There's no fair here. You want to save your name while throwing us under the bus. You used us as punching bags, Michael added. Now that we fought back, you're uncomfortable. Mitchell looked like he wanted to deny it, but the words wouldn't come. You boys are good, he said. But this dojo isn't built for that kind of attention. David rose. Then maybe this dojo doesn't deserve them. He opened the door. Come on, boys. We're done here. As they left, the silence behind them said more than any apology ever could. That night, in the garage, David placed a box on the bench. Inside were 2 new belts, orange. Not earned through the dojo, not sanctioned by the council, but real in the only way that mattered. Earned through blood, resilience, and survival. I know these aren't official, he said. But you earned them. Every thread. The boys didn't hesitate. They tied them on with steady hands. In that moment, the ranks meant nothing. What mattered was the journey. Across town, in 2 separate homes filled with tension and rage, Richard Harrison and Bill Mills sat in silence. Their sons' faces were still bruised. Their egos shattered. We can't let this stand, Richard muttered. They humiliated our families. In front of the entire community. They've ruined Jake's chances at scholarship, Bill growled. And mine at promotion. The police won't do anything. The dojo's falling apart. But we still have options. What are you thinking? We take it to them directly. Quiet. Off record. Bill's eyes narrowed. You mean, we remind them who holds the power in this town. The plan took shape slowly, like venom pooling in a wound. Not violence. Not yet. But pressure. Interference. Retaliation through reputation. David's military record was dug up. Online rumors planted. The twins' performance questioned, accusations of steroid use, falsified ranks, illegal coaching. And yet, none of it stuck. Because the truth had already spread. And with every attempt to discredit them, the Thompsons rose higher in the eyes of those who had seen their journey. By week's end, a regional martial arts newsletter featured a front-page article, 2 yellow belts redefine the rules. Local news reached out. Offers to speak at youth programs followed. The twins turned them down. They weren't looking for fame. They were looking to build something bigger. Something that couldn't be torn down by cowards in khakis with money and grudges. In the garage, they trained harder than ever. But now it wasn't about defense. It was about legacy. They began writing drills. Recording videos. Talking about building a youth program of their own, one that taught strength with purpose, and discipline without silence. David watched them with something deeper than pride, relief. Relief that they had not only survived, but emerged stronger, smarter, and unbroken. The dojo hadn't made them. It had tried to break them. What made them was what came after. What came from within. And the people who tried to strip them of their place. They were already being forgotten. Because when you rise from fire, you don't just walk. You blaze a path. The night was unusually quiet, the kind of quiet that makes every creak in the wood and hum in the walls feel amplified. David sat on the porch, sipping black coffee out of habit more than need, eyes scanning the street like he had in Afghanistan, methodically, instinctively. He didn't like the stillness. It was too complete. Inside, Marcus and Michael were upstairs reviewing footage of their last match, studying angles, dissecting footwork. They weren't obsessed with perfection, they were obsessed with readiness. Ever since the backlash started, they knew it wasn't just a matter of if something would happen, but when. At 11:06 p.m., the headlights cut through the darkness. A sleek, black sedan rolled up without sound, its engine too quiet for a car that size. David set his cup down slowly and stood. The car stopped at the curb. Two figures stepped out. Richard Harrison and Bill Mills. Not in suits. Not in dojo gear. Casual, but expensive. Collars popped. Confidence fake. Rage real. David didn't move. He waited. They walked toward the porch, slow and deliberate. Evening, David said, his voice level. Bit late for a neighborhood stroll. Cut the sarcasm, Richard snapped. You know why we're here. You've embarrassed our families, Bill added. Destroyed our boys' reputations. You think this ends with a tournament? No, David said. I think it ends with you two walking away before you embarrass yourselves further. Richard's jaw twitched. Do you have any idea how much money we've put into our kids' futures? Lessons, travel, private training. You think two ghetto punks get to take that away? They didn't take anything, David replied. Your boys gave it up the moment they chose cowardice over character. They're not cowards, Bill growled. They're champions who got ambushed by street tactics. They lost to better fighters, David said. Better sons. And now you're here because you can't control the story anymore. Richard stepped onto the first porch step. You think this is over? You think we're done? David's eyes narrowed. You step on this porch, and we're done talking. Or what? Richard snarled. You gonna hit me in front of your kids? No, David said, his tone like steel. I'm going to show you what happens when you threaten someone who's done being polite. Richard took another step. David didn't move. But the front door opened. Marcus stood there, silent, tall, eyes unblinking. Michael behind him, fists at his sides. No fear. Just presence. Richard stopped. The weight of what he'd come to do suddenly felt heavier than he could carry. We'll ruin you, he said, but the fire was gone from his voice. We'll bury your names. Try, David said. But know this, if you do, make sure it's the last time you ever knock on our door. Because next time, I won't be standing between you and them. The message was clear. David wasn't protecting his sons from the fight. He was protecting the world from what they'd become when cornered. Bill grabbed Richard's arm. Let's go. They turned and walked back to the car, less certain, less composed. When the door slammed and the engine faded into the distance, David exhaled. Go back inside, he said without looking. Marcus and Michael didn't argue. Upstairs, they returned to their training notes. But now there was a different energy, heavier, more focused. They weren't just learning to fight. They were learning to hold the line. Downstairs, David called Officer Martinez, the local cop who'd once been stationed in the Middle East. They came to the house, David said. Made threats. You want to press charges? Martinez asked. Not yet, David replied. But I want a record. Consider it noted. And David? Yeah. You handled it better than most would. David looked out at the street. You haven't seen how we handle it when it gets worse. After the call, he walked the perimeter of the house, checked the locks, moved the boys' gear to a more secure spot in the garage. He didn't tell them, but he slept on the couch that night. Just in case. Because predators don't always attack when you're ready. They attack when they think you've relaxed. But the Thompsons weren't relaxing. They were sharpening. They were listening. And they were ready for whatever came next. Because the war wasn't over. It had just changed battlegrounds. The fallout came fast. Monday morning, emails flooded the Regional Martial Arts Association's inbox, complaints from parents, concerns from instructors, videos shared by attendees, each one more damning than the last. By noon, an internal investigation had been launched. By Wednesday, it went public. Headlines hit local news stations: dojo under fire for harassment allegations, black students targeted, officials silent, footage shows ambush at youth exhibition match. The Warriors Path dojo wasn't just under scrutiny. It was burning. Mitchell tried to contain it. He issued a public statement filled with hollow platitudes: "This dojo has always promoted discipline, respect, and equality. We are committed to reviewing all allegations thoroughly." But it was too late. The videos didn't lie. Jake's tackle. Connor's swing. The ref's hesitation. And in the background, clear as day, Mitchell watching, doing nothing. Parents began pulling their children from the dojo. Sponsors withdrew. Emails went unanswered. Phone calls flooded in, not with support, but demands for accountability. By the end of the week, Mitchell's instructor certification was suspended pending investigation. The national organization that licensed Warriors Path revoked its charter. The dojo closed its doors the next morning, windows dark, lights off. A note on the door read, "Closed for restructuring," but everyone knew the truth. It wasn't restructuring. It was collapse. At school, Marcus and Michael walked through the halls like shadows of a storm. No longer ignored. No longer whispered about. They were met with nods, respect, even fear. Not because they sought it, but because they had earned it in a world that had tried to deny them everything. Students came up to them, not to gawk, but to ask real questions. "How'd you keep going? Didn't you want to quit? Can you teach me?" Marcus always answered calmly. Michael always stayed quiet. But the message was the same. You don't wait for the world to make space for you. You make it yourself. That weekend, the twins returned to the garage, not to train, but to clean. They reorganized the space, put up shelves, marked new areas for striking drills, bodyweight training, and film review. They hung their orange belts on the wall, not as trophies, but as reminders. This was their dojo now. And they weren't building it for recognition. They were building it for others like them, kids who got ignored, overlooked, dismissed. The first student showed up the next week. A girl named Brielle, 10 years old, wiry and quiet, whose parents said she'd been bullied in school and no longer spoke at lunch. Marcus held the mitts. Michael taught her footwork. By the end of the session, she smiled. A week later, 2 more came. Then 5. Then 10. The Thompson garage became more than a training space. It became a sanctuary. David installed a security system. Neighbors donated old gear. A retired coach heard the story and offered weekend support. The program didn't have a name, but word spread fast. If you needed to learn to protect yourself, if you needed somewhere to belong, you went to the Thompsons. Across town, Richard Harrison sat in his living room, blinds drawn, watching the news replay the final moments of Jake's match again and again. His phone hadn't rung in days. Sponsors pulled out. Invitations disappeared. Jake barely left his room. He hadn't spoken to his father since the night they'd confronted the Thompsons on that porch, and lost. Bill Mills fared no better. His law firm reassigned his cases, quietly nudging him out of the spotlight. His son Connor spent most of his days in silence, lost in the shame of watching everything they had built fall apart in real time. And it wasn't just defeat. It was exposure. The world had seen who they really were, and it hadn't flinched. Mitchell, stripped of his titles, stood outside the empty dojo one evening with a duffel bag in hand, staring at the locked doors. He looked smaller now. Not because he'd lost his rank, but because the illusion of control had finally been shattered. Meanwhile, at the edge of town, in a garage lit by determination and filled with the rhythmic thuds of fists on pads, something new was rising. It didn't need medals or fancy banners. It didn't need approval. It had something better: truth, purpose, and fire that couldn't be bought, bribed, or broken. Marcus and Michael trained beside their new students, pushing, guiding, building not just fighters, but leaders. They weren't trying to fix the world. They were trying to survive it. And in doing so, they were reshaping it. One punch. One lesson. One kid at a time. By the time summer began to stretch its golden arms across Millbrook, the Thompson garage had evolved into something almost mythic. It wasn't just a gym anymore, it was a proving ground, a refuge, a quiet revolution. Word spread faster than David could have imagined. Kids who once sat silently at lunch now arrived after school with fists balled and eyes wide, looking not for revenge but for something much deeper: resilience. Marcus and Michael stood at the center of it all, not as legends or martyrs, but as mentors, real, accessible, battle-forged. They didn't preach. They didn't talk about tournaments or belts. They talked about endurance. About holding the line when no one else would. About being underestimated and standing anyway. The first time someone called them "Sensei," Marcus laughed and corrected them. "Just call us Marcus and Michael. We're still learning too." But even that humility couldn't stop the community from noticing. Local reporters returned, this time with cameras and notepads, asking for follow-ups. David declined interviews, but one story slipped through, a piece titled, "Brothers Turn Pain into Power, Build Martial Arts Program for the Overlooked." The response was immediate. Emails poured in. Donations. Messages from youth centers. State officials took notice. Then came the call from the State Martial Arts Federation. They didn't want to sanction the garage. They wanted to study it. Learn from it. "We've had bullying complaints in dojos across the state," the representative said. "But your sons turned a hostile system into a platform. We want to invite them to speak at our Summer Youth Leadership Summit." David asked the boys. Marcus shrugged. "Do we want to?" Michael's voice was quiet but firm. "If someone had spoken up earlier, maybe none of this would have happened to us." They accepted. The summit took place in a sprawling auditorium packed with over 500 young martial artists, coaches, and parents. When Marcus and Michael walked on stage, the room went still. Not because they looked extraordinary, but because they carried something you couldn't fake. Scars. Calm. Truth. They didn't tell the story like heroes. They told it like survivors. They described the humiliation, the bruises, the silence, the garage, the victories, the ambush, the fallout. And then Marcus said, "We didn't come here to be praised. We came to remind you that silence is a choice. And strength isn't what you do when people are watching. It's what you do when no one is." Michael followed, his voice steady. "Every time you look the other way, every time you let the loudest voices set the rules, you're building a system that breaks the quiet ones. We're not here to break anyone. We're here to teach people how to stand." When they finished, the room erupted. Not with applause. With questions. With kids lining up to talk. To thank them. To ask how to start something like their garage back home. That night, David sat outside the hotel room, watching the stars. He wasn't a sentimental man, but something in his chest felt cracked open. For so long, he'd trained them to survive. But now, they were teaching others how to live. Back in Millbrook, the ruins of Warrior's Path were still visible, signs faded, windows dusty, but no one mourned its loss. In its place, the town had found something better. Real strength. Real leaders. And across the community, instructors began adjusting how they ran their programs, inspired by what they called the Thompson model: training without ego, accountability without favoritism, and discipline with empathy. Meanwhile, in a modest garage filled with second-hand gear and boundless spirit, kids continued to arrive. Some nervous. Some angry. Some hopeless. But all of them left stronger. Marcus and Michael took turns leading drills. David watched from the doorway, arms crossed, eyes soft. They weren't just fighters anymore. They were builders. And they were building something the world couldn't take away. A new generation of warriors. Warriors who smiled through pain. Who stood through shame. Who rose, not to destroy, but to defend. The fire that had once nearly consumed them now lit the path forward, and no one who walked it would ever be alone again. 3 weeks later, the Tri-County Summer Invitational returned, this time with stricter oversight, new officials, and a new code of conduct drafted in part by the Thompson family themselves. It wasn't about the trophies anymore. It was about reclaiming a space that once betrayed them. The boys didn't plan on competing. They were content coaching their students, many of whom had entered under the newly formed Thompson Martial Arts Collective. But as the names were read aloud in the auditorium, something shifted. Open Division, Marcus Thompson vs. Gavin Rizzo. Michael Thompson vs. Eric Kim. The crowd murmured. Cameras lifted. It was happening again, but this time, they were walking in on their terms. David placed his hand on each son's shoulder. You don't need to prove anything. You've already changed more lives than any trophy could. Marcus met his father's gaze. This isn't about proving anything. It's about showing them what we stand for. Michael added, it's about walking through the fire and making sure others know they can too. When Marcus stepped into the ring, the silence was electric. Gavin, a state-ranked fighter, wore confidence like armor. But Marcus moved like water, elusive, precise, calculated. Each strike wasn't about dominance, it was about control. He didn't fight to punish. He fought to teach. The match lasted 4 rounds. Marcus won by unanimous decision. No celebration. Just a bow. Then Michael entered. Eric came in hot, aggressive and technical, but Michael absorbed every move, responding with sharp counters and impeccable timing. In the 3rd round, Michael executed a perfect sweep, bringing Eric down cleanly and offering a hand to help him up. When the match ended, Michael's hand was raised too. 2 victories. No arrogance. Just clarity. The auditorium erupted, not with screaming, but with standing ovations. Not just for skill, but for what it represented. Later, as the twins packed up their gear, they found a line of younger students waiting, not for autographs, but for a moment. I'm not afraid anymore, said one boy with a soft voice. I saw what you did. I want to be like that. Another added, they tried to break you, but you stood anyway. So maybe I can too. It was in that moment the boys understood, the fight had never been just about them. It had always been about what came after. That night, back home in the garage, the 3 Thompsons sat together, quiet. The walls bore the scuffs of struggle. The mats carried the sweat of transformation. And the air felt different, like something had been lifted, not just from their shoulders, but from the community itself. David finally spoke. You boys started this because you were hurt. But look what you built from that pain. You didn't just heal yourselves. You became a force for others. Marcus looked around the garage, now packed with gear, photos, a wall of student belts, and a framed quote, "Strength isn't given. It's chosen." We should name it, Michael said. Marcus thought for a moment. Legacy Dojo, he replied. Not ours, everyone's who stood, who rose, who refused to stay broken. David smiled, a rare softness in his eyes. Legacy Dojo it is. And so it was. Legacy Dojo became more than a name. It became a movement. Anti-bullying initiatives. Martial arts education. Workshops across schools. A non-profit born from blood, sweat, and dignity. They were invited to speak at national events. Schools across the country adopted their training philosophy. And all the while, in that same garage, kids kept showing up, ready to become something more. Jake and Connor eventually disappeared from the spotlight, their reputations too damaged to repair. Their story became a cautionary tale about unchecked arrogance, silence in the face of wrong, and the illusion of invincibility. Meanwhile, Marcus and Michael's story lived on, not in headlines, but in every child who walked through their door unsure, and walked out unbreakable. The final image wasn't one of fists raised in triumph. It was of two brothers standing side by side as the sun set behind their garage, shadows long, hearts steady, knowing they had turned their pain into power, and their scars into a map for others to follow. The world hadn't handed them respect. They carved it, bled for it, and then gave it away freely. And that, in the end, was their real victory. Not the matches. Not the medals. But the legacy they built, one punch, one lesson, one heart at a time. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?